In the heart of a frozen Sierra Nevada blizzard, a heavy metallic dragging sound echoed outside the cabin of Silas Vance, a retired commander who thought he had left the world behind. When he forced the door open, he was met with a sight that stopped his heart. 6 German shepherds, skeletal and scarred, were chained together by a rusted iron collar, and at the center of that chain, they were dragging a massive log studded with jagged nails. How did these 6 warriors find the strength to pull such an agonizing weight through miles of deep snow? What dark secret follows in their blood-stained tracks, and can a man who has lost everything find his soul by saving those the world has discarded? Stay with us to see how this incredible bond breaks the heaviest chains of the past. Please support us by subscribing to our channel. Chapter 1. Chains in the Midnight Snow. The wind did not just howl in the Sierra Nevada, it screamed. It was a relentless, icy shriek that clawed at the cedar logs of the cabin, searching for any crack to pour its frozen fury inside. Silas Vance sat by the hearth. The fire was a dying amber eye flickering in the shadows. He stared into the embers, his face a road map of scars and memories he preferred to keep buried. He was a man built of granite and silence, a former Special Forces commander who had traded his medals for the solitude of the high peaks. In this wilderness, there were no orders to give. There were no missions that went sideways. And most painfully, there were no phone calls from a son who no longer knew his name. Silas preferred it this way. The silence of the mountain was easier to handle than the silence of a broken home. He reached for a cast-iron poker, stirring the coals. Then he froze. His ears, trained by decades of combat, picked up a sound that did not belong to the storm. It was not the wind. It was not the groaning of the pines. It was a rhythmic, metallic clinking. Clink, drag, clink, drag. The sound was heavy. It was the sound of iron meeting stone. Then came a dull, thudding vibration that shook the very floorboards beneath his boots. Something massive was being dragged across his porch. Silas stood up. His hand moved instinctively toward the heavy flashlight on the mantel. He did not feel fear. He felt a cold, familiar alertness. He stepped toward the heavy oak door. The scratching began. Soft at first, then a desperate, frantic pawing at the wood. Silas threw the bolt. He braced his shoulder against the door and pulled. The blizzard exploded into the room, a wall of white blindness and stinging needles of ice. He shielded his eyes and stepped out onto the porch. The beam of his flashlight cut through the gloom. It landed on a pair of eyes, then another, and another. Silas gasped. 6 German shepherds stood on his porch, but they were not standing freely. They were bound together in a circle by a thick, rusted iron chain. The chain was welded to heavy collars that had rubbed their necks raw. And at the center of this chain, trailing behind them, was a nightmare. It was a massive log, a thick, jagged piece of oak nearly 5 feet long. It was studded with rusted iron nails, their points facing outward like the quills of a porcupine. This was a tether designed for one purpose: to make escape impossible, to ensure that any attempt to run would be met with excruciating pain and the crushing weight of the timber. The dogs were skeletons covered in fur, their ribs pushed against their skin. Their coats were matted with frozen blood and clumps of ice, yet they were not broken. The lead dog, a massive male with a notched ear, looked directly at Silas. His amber eyes were wide with exhaustion. His chest was heaving, his breath coming in ragged plumes of steam. Silas realized the truth in an instant. These animals had not just survived. They had collaborated. They had moved as one. In the middle of the deadliest storm of the year, they had synchronized their remaining strength to pull that agonizing weight up the mountain slope. They had seen the amber glow of his window. They had chosen to live. Silas felt a surge of something he had not felt in years. Purpose. "Easy now," he rasped. His voice was rusty from disuse. The lead dog didn't growl. He lowered his head, a gesture of profound, desperate surrender. Silas stepped back into the cabin and grabbed his heavy-duty bolt cutters. He returned to the porch, kneeling in the biting snow. The metal of the chain was frozen. He positioned the cutters on the link closest to the lead dog. He squeezed. The iron groaned and snapped with a sharp crack. One by one, he cut the links. He worked with the precision of a technician defusing a bomb. He cut the lead dog free, then the female beside him, then the younger males at the back. The heavy log settled into the snow with a final dead thud. The burden was gone. "Inside," Silas commanded, pointing to the open door. "Move! Now!" They didn't hesitate. The dogs limped into the cabin, their claws clicking on the hardwood. They did not scatter. Even in their state of near death, they moved with a tactical grace. They formed a semicircle in front of the fireplace, huddled together for warmth. They did not bark. They did not beg. They simply watched him. Silas slammed the door and threw the bolt. The storm was locked out, but the tragedy was now inside. He rushed to the kitchen, grabbing every clean towel he owned. He knelt beside the lead dog. The animal was shivering so violently that his teeth were chattering. Silas began to rub the dog's fur, drying the ice and melted snow. He moved his hands down the dog's neck. His heart sank. The iron collar had been on so long that the skin had grown over the edges. The nails on the log had left deep, jagged gouges along the dog's flanks. "Who did this to you?" Silas whispered. The dog leaned his heavy head against Silas's shoulder. It was a weight of pure trust. Silas spent the next several hours in a blur of motion. He warmed bowls of water, adding a bit of honey for energy. He fed them small, frequent portions of dried meat. He moved from dog to dog with antiseptic and bandages. He cleaned the wounds on their necks. He pulled splinters of oak from their paws. As he worked, he noticed something chilling. These were not ordinary wounds. Some of the marks were surgical. Small, faded scars where something had been implanted. And the way they watched the door. They weren't just resting. They were on watch. The lead dog sat at the head of the group. 2 others faced the windows. 2 more covered the kitchen entrance. The smallest one stayed near Silas. It was a defensive perimeter, a military formation. Silas sat back on his heels, his hands stained with their blood and his heart heavy with their pain. He looked at the discarded iron chain by the door. It looked like a snake killed in the snow. The fire roared in the hearth, now casting long, dancing shadows across the room. The dogs finally began to drift into a fitful sleep. But even in sleep, their legs twitched as if they were still running, still pulling that heavy log, still trying to find a way home. Silas leaned his back against the wall, his eyes never leaving the pack. He knew the mountain. He knew that anything that could force 6 powerful dogs to flee like this was something to be feared. He also knew that whoever had chained them would eventually come looking for their property. He looked at the lead dog, whose amber eyes opened for a split second to check on his master. For the first time in a decade, Silas Vance did not feel alone. He felt like a commander again, and he knew that when the morning came, the peace of his mountain would be gone. He would have to fight for these souls, and for the first time, he had something worth fighting for. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the steady collective breathing of the pack. Outside, the storm continued to scream, but inside, the silence was no longer empty. It was full of life. It was full of a new, fierce loyalty. The war was coming, But tonight, they would sleep. Tonight, they were safe. Chapter 2. Secrets Beneath the Fur. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It was a cold, pale light that filtered through the frosted windows of the cabin. The world outside was buried under a fresh shroud of white. Silas Vance stood by the stove, his hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. He watched the 6 German shepherds. They were awake. They were silent. And they were watching him back. A heavy thud sounded at the porch, then a frantic knocking. Silas moved with a predator's grace, his hand instinctively reaching for the heavy tool on the counter. "Silas, it is Clara, please open the door." He pulled the bolt back. Clara, the local veterinarian, stumbled inside. She was wrapped in layers of wool and Gore-Tex, her face red from the biting wind. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes went wide as she saw the pack huddled by the hearth. "Silas, what on earth is this?" "They came out of the storm," Silas said. His voice was a low rumble. "They were chained to a log. I need your help, Clara. They are hurt. Badly." Clara did not hesitate. She dropped her medical bag and shed her heavy coat. Professional instinct took over. She knelt beside the lead dog, the one with the notched ear. As she began to run her gloved hands through his thick, matted fur, her expression shifted. It went from pity to confusion, and then to pure horror. "Silas," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "Look at this." She parted the fur near the dog's shoulder. There, tattooed into the pale skin, was a crisp black barcode. Beside it was a series of alphanumeric codes. Silas leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "That is not a farm mark," he said. Clara moved her fingers further down the neck. She felt something hard, a small rectangular lump just beneath the surface of the skin. "It is an active GPS transponder," she said. "And look here, these surgical scars. They are too precise. This is military grade." Silas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. He knew the shadows of the world. He had operated in them for decades. This was the signature of a ghost project. Illegal, unregulated, cruel. "They are not just dogs, Clara," Silas said. He looked at the lead dog. The animal met his gaze with an intelligence that was unnerving. "They are prototypes." As if to prove his point, the dogs moved. Without a sound, the lead dog nudged one of the younger males. The younger dog stood up and trotted to the west window. He sat. He watched. 2 others moved to the back door, positioning themselves in the shadows. They were setting a perimeter. They were guarding their rescuers. "They are acting like a tactical unit," Clara said, her breath hitching. "Silas, who did this? Who would do this to such beautiful creatures?" "Men who think they can play at being creators," Silas replied. "Men who have forgotten what it means to have a soul." Silas turned his attention to the heavy iron collar he had cut off the lead dog. He brought it to the workbench. He began to pry at the inner lining with a screwdriver. Deep within the padding, hidden inside a small waterproof compartment, he found it. A silver data chip. Encrypted. Silent. The black box of a nightmare. He held the chip in his palm. This was why they had been chained. This was why they were being hunted. The dogs were not just the experiment. They were the hard drives. As Clara worked cleaning the deep infections under the collars, a soft whine came from the smallest dog. She reached out her hand, shaking. "It is okay, sweetheart," she murmured. The dog leaned into her touch, closing its eyes. In that moment, the cabin felt different. For years, Silas had filled these rooms with his own bitterness. He had built walls of wood and walls of stone around his heart. But as he watched these broken warriors find peace in a kind word, his own walls began to crack. He saw his son's face in the flickering firelight. He remembered the boy's laugh before the war took the light out of Silas's eyes. He felt a strange, aching solace. The dogs had come to him for protection, but perhaps they were the ones saving him. Suddenly, the lead dog stood up, his ears pinned back. A low, vibrating growl started in his chest. It was a sound of pure warning. Clara froze. "What is it?" Silas grabbed his binoculars and moved to the window. Far down the mountain trail, barely visible through the swirling snow, he saw them. 3 black SUVs. They were moving slowly, but with purpose. They weren't lost. They were following a signal. "The GPS," Silas cursed. "They have locked onto the transponders. They know exactly where we are." Clara looked at the dogs, then at Silas. "We have to call the police. We have to get out of here." "The police won't get here in time through this snow," Silas said. His voice was no longer that of a lonely hermit. It was the voice of a commander. "And the people in those trucks, they own the police in 3 counties. No, Clara, we aren't running." He walked to the corner of the room. He pulled back a heavy rug, revealing a hidden trapdoor. Inside was a large olive-drab crate. He broke the seal. Inside lay the tools of his former life. Radios, body armor, precision equipment. He began to transform the cabin. He worked with a cold mechanical efficiency. He reinforced the door frames with steel bracing. He set up a series of tripwires across the porch. He checked his communications gear, his eyes hard as flint. "Silas," Clara said, her voice small. "You are one man." Silas looked at the 6 German shepherds. The lead dog walked over and sat at his side. The animal pressed his shoulder against Silas's leg. The other 5 followed, forming a line of gray and charcoal fur. Their eyes were bright. Their teeth were bared. They were no longer victims. "I am not alone," Silas said. "I have my recruits." He looked at the SUVs crawling up the slope. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. The mountain had been his sanctuary. Now it would be his battlefield. He looked at the small data chip on the table. He looked at the dogs who had suffered to bring it here. "They think they are coming for property," Silas whispered. He reached down and scratched the lead dog behind the notched ear. "But they are about to find out that a warrior never truly retires." He dimmed the lights. The cabin fell into a deep, predatory shadow. Outside, the wind began to pick up again. The hunt was over. The war had begun. Chapter 3. The Fortress in the Wild. The darkness outside was absolute. Inside the cabin, Silas Vance moved like a shadow within a shadow. He looked at Clara. She was sitting on the floor, her back against the kitchen island, clutching a medical kit. He looked at the dogs. They were standing in low, ready stances. The lead dog fixed his amber eyes on the door, his body a coiled spring of muscle and scarred fur. Then the silence broke. A voice boomed through a megaphone distorted by the wind and the electronic hum of high-tech gear. "Silas Vance, we know you are in there." The voice was cold, clinical. "You are in possession of restricted corporate property. These assets are high-value military technology. Release the dogs now, and you will not be harmed." Silas didn't blink. He knew that voice. It was the tone of men who burned villages and called it progress. "Property," Silas whispered to the lead dog. The dog let out a breath that was almost a sigh. Silas stepped to the window, staying deep in the gloom. Through his night vision optics, the world turned a ghostly green. He saw them. 8 men, maybe 10. They were wearing white winter camouflage and carrying suppressed, short-barreled rifles. They weren't police. They were mercenaries. "Silas, this is your final warning." The voice echoed off the granite cliffs. "Open the door or we will breach." Silas reached for a remote trigger on his belt. "Welcome to the mountain," he muttered. He pressed a button. Outside, beneath the fresh layer of powder, the first snow trap ignited. It wasn't a bomb. It was a high-pressure burst of compressed air and fine white powder. A blinding cloud erupted in the middle of the mercenary line. It was a tactical whiteout. The mercenaries scrambled, their high-tech thermal goggles suddenly clouded by the swirling debris. "Go!" Silas commanded. He didn't mean the dogs. Not yet. He pulled a series of wires inside the cabin. Suddenly, wooden decoys, simple shapes draped in old jackets, swung across the windows on the opposite side of the house. The mercenaries opened fire. Pop, pop, pop. The suppressed rounds shattered the glass, shredding the decoys. They were wasting ammunition on shadows. "Now," Silas hissed. He opened a small floor hatch near the back of the cabin. The dogs moved with terrifying silence. They didn't bark. They didn't whimper. They vanished into the crawl space beneath the house, slipping out through a hidden vent into the snowy night. Silas watched from the upper loft. The lead dog emerged into the storm like a ghost. He circled wide, staying downwind. The other 5 dogs followed in a perfect flank. They were moving in a pincer formation that Silas had taught elite soldiers for 20 years. Except these hunters didn't need radios. They moved by instinct. A mercenary stepped toward the porch, his rifle raised. Suddenly, a gray blur hit him from the darkness. The lead dog didn't go for the throat. He struck the man's lead leg, tearing the fabric of his suit and knocking him off balance into a deep snowdrift. Before the man could recover, a second dog snatched the rifle by its sling and dragged it into the brush. Chaos erupted. "Target acquired west side, there are wolves out here," one mercenary shouted. "They aren't wolves," the leader screamed. "Hold your fire, do not damage the assets." That was their mistake. They valued the dogs as property. Silas valued them as brothers. The mercenaries grew desperate. They realized the cabin was a trap. One of them pulled a flare gun from his belt. He fired it directly onto the cedar shingle roof. Then another. The dry wood, protected from the snow by the eaves, caught fire instantly. Silas smelled the smoke. Clara out now. He grabbed his pack and hit the release for the main back door. They ran into the biting cold as the roof above them turned into a crown of orange flames. The heat was intense, a searing contrast to the freezing wind. The cabin, Silas's only home, his place of peace, was being consumed by the fire. He didn't look back. They plunged into the deep forest. The trees were thick here, ancient pines that blocked the moonlight. "Keep moving, Clara," Silas urged. "Don't stop until you reach the ravine." Behind them, the mercenaries were regrouping. They had 2 specialized snow-tracked vehicles. The engines roared a mechanical growl that echoed through the trees. They were gaining ground. Silas stopped by a narrow pass between 2 massive boulders. He looked at the dogs. They were panting, their fur singed from the heat of the fire, but their eyes were sharp. He signaled the lead dog to stay with Clara. He took the other 2 and climbed the ridge. He waited until the first tracked vehicle entered the narrow pass. Silas didn't use a gun. He used the mountain itself. He kicked loose a heavy preset timber that held back a wall of ice and felled logs. An artificial avalanche roared down. It didn't crush the vehicle, but it buried the tracks in 6 feet of frozen debris. The engine stalled. The doors were jammed shut by the weight of the ice. Silas dropped from the ridge landing on the hood of the second vehicle. He smashed the driver's side window and pulled the man out. A second mercenary leveled his weapon, but a charcoal-colored blur, the youngest of the dogs, leaped from the shadows and clamped onto the man's arm. The gun fell into the snow. Silas grabbed a tablet device from the dashboard of the vehicle. "Clara here." Clara ran forward. She took the tablet and began swiping through the files. Her face turned pale in the glow of the screen. "It is all here, Silas," she gasped. "The videos of the experiments, the logs, the names of the investors. It is horrific." She hit the upload button, sending the data to a secure federal server she had prepared earlier. The leader of the mercenaries, a man with a jagged scar across his chin, crawled out from the snow. He reached for a sidearm. Silas was faster. He stepped on the man's wrist and pointed his own rifle at the man's chest. "Give me one reason," Silas said. His voice was as cold as the Sierra ice. "You can't stop this, Vance," the man spat. "We own the results. Those dogs are the future of warfare." "No," Silas said, looking at the lead dog who stood over the fallen mercenary. "They are the end of your career." In the distance, the rhythmic thumping of heavy rotors filled the air. Blue and red lights flickered against the snow-covered canopy. Silas had sent the emergency beacon the moment the data began to upload. 4 federal transport helicopters descended their searchlights, turning the forest into a stage. The property was safe. The mercenaries were bound in their own zip ties. The violent pursuit was over. Silas stood in the clearing, watching the fire from his cabin glow in the distance. He felt a cold nose press against his hand. The lead dog sat beside him, watching the helicopters land. The iron chains were gone. The log was a memory, but the warrior spirit remained. Silas looked at the dogs, then at the ruins of his home. He had lost a house, but he had found his soul. Chapter 4. A Warrior's Redemption. The snow eventually melted. The icy grip of winter loosened its hold on the Sierra Nevada, giving way to the gentle hum of spring. Where the charred remains of Silas Vance's cabin once stood, a new structure began to rise. It was not a fortress for a lonely man. It was a sanctuary for heroes. The news of the Ghost Pack had swept across the country like wildfire. The evidence Clara uploaded had shattered the walls of the illegal private military firm. Facilities were raided. Corrupt officials were led away in handcuffs. And at the heart of every news report was the story of an aging warrior and the 6 dogs who refused to die. Silas did not return to his solitude. The silence he once cherished now felt hollow. He realized that his life was no longer about hiding from the world. It was about protecting those who had no voice. He used the settlement funds and the support of a grateful public to build something meaningful. He called it the Elite Dog Warriors Center. It was a place where abandoned military and police dogs could find a second chance. A place where the bond between man and animal was sacred. The 6 German shepherds were the first residents. They were no longer the skeletons Silas had found on that fateful night. Their ribs were covered with healthy muscle. Their charcoal and silver fur shone with a healthy luster. The raw weeping wounds from the iron chains had long since healed into thin, silvery lines. But Silas did not hide those scars. Instead, he replaced the rusted iron shackles with something different. Each dog wore a custom collar of deep navy blue leather. Attached to each collar was a small golden medallion, a medal of honor for their bravery. The lead dog, the one with the notched ear, never left Silas's side. He moved with a quiet dignity, serving as the patriarch of the pack. Silas found himself talking to the dogs as he worked on the new kennel. He found himself smiling at their antics in the tall grass. For the first time in many years, the heavy weight in his chest had lifted. He had found his purpose. One afternoon, the air was soft, with the scent of pine and wild clover. Silas was in the meadow behind the main building. He was throwing a ball for the youngest dog, watching the animal leap with boundless energy. The other 5 dogs were lounging in the shade of a massive ancient pine tree. Silas let out a genuine booming laugh as the dog tripped over its own paws in excitement. It was a sound that had been absent from these mountains for a very long time. He didn't hear the truck pull up the gravel driveway. He didn't notice the young man standing by the fence watching him in stunned silence. The young man was Caleb. He wore a sturdy jacket and carried a heavy rucksack. His face was a younger mirror of his father's, though without the deep-set lines of sorrow. Caleb stood frozen beneath the branches of a pine. He watched the man he thought he had lost forever. He saw his father, the stern commander, rolling on the grass with a dog. He saw the man laughing. "Dad!" Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. Silas froze. He stood up slowly, brushing the grass from his knees. The dogs sensed the change in energy. They did not growl. They did not attack. They simply formed a calm, protective circle around Silas, watching the stranger with curious eyes. Silas looked at his son. The years of silence felt like a mountain between them. But then Silas looked at the lead dog. He remembered the rusted chains. He remembered that if 6 broken dogs could pull a log through a blizzard together, then surely a father and son could bridge the gap of a few years. "Caleb," Silas said. His voice was thick with emotion. Caleb walked forward, his eyes shimmering. "I saw the news, Dad. I saw what you did for them. I didn't know you had this in you." Silas took a step toward his son. "I didn't know either. Not until they showed up at my door." The lead dog walked up to Caleb. He sniffed the young man's hand and gave a gentle, approving nudge. The tension broke. Caleb reached out and grabbed his father in a fierce, desperate hug. Silas held on tight, burying his face in his son's shoulder. The dogs circled them, tails wagging, sensing the restoration of a pack. "I'm sorry, Caleb," Silas whispered, "for everything." "I'm here now," Caleb replied, pulling back to look at the new facility. "And I'm not leaving. You're going to need help running this place." Silas looked at the sprawling sanctuary, the happy dogs, and his son. The warrior's redemption was complete. He had survived the wars of the world and the wars of his own heart. They spent the rest of the day walking the perimeter of the ranch. Silas told him the story of the iron chain and the heavy log. He spoke of the bravery of the 6 warriors who chose to run toward the light. The sun began to set, painting the Sierra peaks in shades of violet and gold. The air grew cool, but the warmth in the valley remained. Silas realized that life is often like that blizzard. It can be cold. It can be cruel. It can chain us to the heavy logs of our own mistakes and sorrows. But we are not meant to pull those weights alone. When we find our pack, we find our strength. Unity can help us overcome the heaviest chains life throws our way. Silas Vance stood on the porch of his new home, his son by his side and his warriors at his feet. He was a commander once more, but this time he was leading them toward peace. As the sun sets over the Sierra peaks, we are reminded that no burden is too heavy when we carry it together. Silas and his warriors showed us that even the deepest scars can become symbols of strength, and that love is the only force capable of breaking the chains of the past. If this journey moved your heart, please join our community by subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us tell more stories of courage and loyalty. Before you go, a new story of a remarkable hero is appearing on your screen now. Simply click to continue the journey with us.